Hello, I'm Makdissi, and today I'll be talking about the NFL and CTE. So, in the recent years, the term CTE has been brought up a lot, especially with football. But what is CTE? How do you get it? Why is it so common in football? And is the NFL doing enough to prevent CTE? Chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, is a neurodegenerative disease associated with head trauma. CTE has only been recently identified, so there is not much data on it. In a study done by the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, researchers went through all the data in CTE cases and provided an overview of all the cases. Through this overview, they were able to show that there was only one link to CTE, a history of MTBI. MTBI is a mild traumatic brain injury. The researchers, among other things, looked at the neuropathology, substance abuse, and symptoms of CTE. The only connection, though, that they could make was a history of MTBI. So a common MTBI in football is a concussion. Football is a sport very prone to concussions due to how the game is played. So momentum is the product of mass and velocity. When two football players collide, their total momentum is equal to each of their momenta combined. During the collision, the momenta of each of the players will change, but the total momentum is always conserved. So if a small player, say a running back, runs at a large player, a linebacker, and so the running back has a momentum of 900 kilogram meter per second, and the large player has a momentum of negative 900 kilogram meter per second. When they collide, they will both come to a stop, since their total momentum before was 0 kilogram meter per second. It has to be 0 kilogram meter per second at the end. Since momentum is conserved, whatever it is at the beginning must be the same at the end. So since the change in momentum is the same for each player, they experience the same amount of force. But for them both to have the same momentum, the running back must have been running faster to reach the same momentum as the linebacker, since momentum is equal to mass times velocity, so the smaller player had a larger velocity. And since that smaller player had a larger velocity, they will experience more acceleration. So if the running back was running at 10 meters per second, then slowed down to 0 meters per second, while the linebacker was running at only 5 meters per second and slowed down to 0 meters per second, the running back will feel the force more than the linebacker. So Chad Orzel, an associate professor in the Department of Physics and Astronomy at Union College, explains it as, "We detect as the sensation of force is actually acceleration, or the change in velocity divided the duration of the collision." By understanding the conservation of momentum, it is clear that the running back is at more risk of injuring himself since he is accelerating much more than the linebacker and will feel the force more. But this is just one scenario. This can happen to any player during any collision during football, which is why there are endless amounts of injuries that can occur during football. One of the worst injuries that a player can receive during football is one that they cannot physically see, a concussion. So a concussion occurs when the brain shifts violently in the head, and with the larger acceleration, as I previously explained, there is more of a chance of getting a concussion. So, as I explained above again, during collisions, one player will experience more acceleration, so players are constantly at risk of getting a concussion. And many people argue that since concussions are still so common in football, that the NFL is not doing enough. But the NFL has created a set of rules to protect players from concussions based off of the research done on concussions. For example, a study done by the Ohio State University, Columbus, Nationwide Children's Hospital in Columbus, and the National Collegiate Athletic Association showed that there is a much higher chance of getting a concussion during a competition than in practice. In high school, the concussion rate per 1,000 athlete exposures in practice was 0.21, while in competition, it was 1.55. In college, the concussion rate per 1,000 athlete exposures in practice was 0.39, while in competition, it was 3.02. So this shows that after knowing data like this, the NFL has taken action and has created protocols to protect players during games. And as of 2013, the league's Head, Neck, and Spine Committee developed concussion assessment guidelines to detect concussions better. In this protocol, there are two positions to help identify and diagnose concussions. There's the unaffiliated neurotrauma consultant and the booth ATC. The unaffiliated neurotrauma consultant is not affiliated with any NFL team, hence the unaffiliated, and they watch from the sideline identifying concussion symptoms in players. They also assist the physicians in evaluating the players and make the final call on whether or not a player has a concussion and if they can go back into the game. The booth ATC stands for a Certified Athletic Trainer, sits in a stadium booth during the game and watches for potential concussions. They can review game film, and if they identify something dangerous, they can call a medical timeout, and medical personnel on the field will evaluate the player. Also, there's a minimum of 29 medical professionals at every NFL game. So during a game, if a player is showing concussion symptoms, it is mandatory that they are removed from the game. In 2011, the Madden rule was introduced, and it remains, if a player is diagnosed with a concussion, they must leave the field immediately and are not allowed to return unless medically cleared. After being diagnosed as concussed, the player must be monitored and is not allowed to play until they have returned to baseline cognitive functions. So, with recent research on when concussions occur, the NFL was able to adapt their protocol and better protect players. The NFL is also changing their preseason protocols based off of research on the education of coaches and sports trainers. In a recent study done in Australia, they looked at coaches and sports trainers to see if the messages from published concussion management guidelines about sports-related concussions were getting through to them. Most of the coaches and sports trainers knew the primary symptoms of a concussion, but fewer than 50% recognized the increased risk of another concussion following an initial concussion. This study concluded that the message about sports-related concussions was not getting through to coaches and sports trainers. So the coaches and sports trainers need to be more educated to ensure the safety of players. So a new part of the NFL's protocol is that the coaches and players have to be educated on concussion symptoms, and the players have to take a baseline neurological exam. So this shows that the NFL is considering research done on concussions and applying it to their players and coaches to make sure that the players are safe. An argument that some people will make is that a lot of teams don't follow these rules and these protocols that the NFL has put in place because they want their star players to continue to play. But in 2016, the NFL started to impose penalties after games if it was determined that they did not follow these protocols. Teams could be fined from $100,000 to $150,000 or could even lose draft picks. Losing money is not good for a team, and losing a draft pick is something very serious in football. So by putting these punishments in place, the NFL is ensuring that the players are safe. So to conclude this, the NFL is doing everything in their power to prevent concussions. They look at research done on concussions and change their rules and protocols based off of that. After research proved that coaches and sports trainers aren't educated on concussions, they changed the protocol. After research proved that majority of the concussions occur during games, the NFL changed the protocol during games. And they even have severe punishments for teams that do not comply with their rules. So by doing this, the NFL is doing everything in their power to reduce the risk of concussions, which is the most common MTBI in football, which is the only connection to CTE. So the NFL is doing everything in their power to prevent CTE. Thanks for listening, and have a good night.